here's a Scared for Reals Legacy Special.
Hey, it's Chris O'Neill.
Adam Perry.
Here we are, 1964, 60 years. And sometimes it's hard to wrap my head around some of these movies because I watched them when I was just randomly surfing the TV late at night. And we're Scared for Reals. Don't forget, interact with us. Adam says we have people listening to us all over the country, all over. So drop us a line, comment, tell us what you think, give us some feedback. Or if you have any requests, if you want us to delve into something you love, we'd like to hear about that too. So, Adam, 1964, I'm going to let you go first.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, so we're going to count down a little list of our favorite films of 1964. And
it's hard to keep it to just five.
Hard to keep, every time we do these types of episodes, it's hard to keep it to just five. But
so go first. Go ahead.
So I'd be remiss to say, I had to put this one in there. I know we are Scared for Reals. We kind of stick to the cult movies, the horror movies. But being such a music fan and such a big fan of the Beatles, how can I not mention 1964 by Richard Lester, A Hard Day's Night? Mm-hmm. Especially now, actually just this past week, the 60th anniversary of the Beatles landing in New York City for the first time. Their first tour of the U.S. with Ed Sullivan. I Will Want to Hold Your Hand is a number one hit. And they make this comedy, which is half truth, half spoof of what these four guys were really going through in Beatlemania.
Right.
And it's such a fun, it's one of my all-time favorite, both Hard Day's Night and Help, which would come out a year later.
It kind of started, in a sense, the mockumentary a little bit. That would very popular in the 80s.
Yes, and it has its impact because these two movies, especially Help and A Hard Day's Night, it doesn't get the credit. Beatles influence. I know some people aren't big Beatles fans and they'll roll their eyes. However, this is the kind of the start of music videos.
Yeah, it's basically like an extended music video.
It's a 90-minute music video with montages to their music, and basically what MTV would become 20 years, 30 years later. And it kind of kickstart Richard Lester quite a bit. It sure did. Yeah, sure did.
And the guy dabbled into all different types of genres afterwards.
Yeah,
but this is what made him a name.
Yes. And how can it not? You attach your name to the Beatles. Anybody attaches their name to the Beatles, you're going to get some sort of shine. Right. And it's the Beatles.
And that's the thing. Yeah. Like I was not a fan of this movie. I was not a fan of Yellow Submarine. I saw Yellow Submarine on the big screen.
Yeah.
You can't go wrong with the soundtrack, though.
No.
Whether you like the movie or not, if you're a Beatles fan, you love their music, you have to see it once.
Yeah. I love A Hard Day's Night. Like I said, it's what these guys were going through during the Mania years, not being able really to leave anywhere because of the chaos that was around them. Right. I think it shows that pretty well, but then it puts the comedic spin on it with, Paul McCartney's grandfather and all the trouble that Ringo gets in. And you really got to see all four personalities of the Beatles,
right?
And, for the first time, kind of fleshed out.
You get to see that they're not just musicians. They're like us. They have a sense of humor.
Yeah,
and they show their sense of humor quite a bit.
Big time.
So
we are Scared for Reals. But again, if we're talking 1964, being the big Beatles fan I am, I could not do the show without mentioning A Hard Day's Night.
Well, A Hard Day's Night was very successful. It was huge. It was a phenomenon. But you look at all of the cult movies in the 80s, like Spinal Tap, it was a success, but it wasn't a huge success at the time. It has a cult following. So these mockumentaries, some of them are not like huge successes, but they all probably reference A Hard Day's Night. I can't vouch for that, but I mean, this is
its influences.
Yeah. I mean, this is the one that started all of that mockumentary craze.
Yeah.
And that in itself is inspired by, there's this French filmmaker named Agnès Varda who liked to blend reality with fiction. That was her big thing. She was the start of the French New Wave. 1955, she did a love story in her hometown, but she also used real fishermen in her hometown, so it kind of blended. She was kind of influenced by the Italian neorealism, again, where you have real people, non-actors. So it gives it a documentary kind of feel, even though the movie's a fiction.
Right.
So I'm inclined to believe that Richard Lester saw some of these movies, and that sparked a little bit. Even though they're nothing alike, just drawing some inspiration from those films in the 50s and early 60s.
Well, I mean, and even still, you could look at what the Beatles themselves were going through at the time with, again, the mania and
right.
and literally their life, as described by, Paul's grandfather, as he's kind of complained with Paul McCartney that, the only where he's been in the last 34 hours was a car, a room, a car in a room, and a car in a room.
Right.
That was basically their life, because they couldn't go anywhere. If they stepped outside the hotel, they were destroyed by girls. So I mean, their life at this time was utter chaos.
Right.
And to a level that had never been seen before, even with like Elvis, the mania that and craze that the Beatles brought onto themselves through no fault of their own. It just happened. Was absolutely insane. And Hard Day's Night does a really good job of capturing that, but again, putting that fictional funny spin on it to where it's an enjoyable movie. And again, you get to,
because it's very stressful for them in real life.
Oh, absolutely.
But making it fun to watch for everyone else, it kind of lets the audience in at the same. They can relate to it, but also at the same time, laugh along with them.
Yes, yeah.
Which is not all these guys, not all of these musicians can laugh like that. Mm-hmm. You take someone like Neil Peart of Rush, very reserved. I mean, the song "Limelight" is all about how he feels about being in the limelight. You know what I mean? So not everyone can handle it a different way. It was great that the Beatles had a great sense of humor about it.
Oh, absolutely. And again, you want to talk about lasting impact, without a movie like Hard Day's Night, we don't get MTV and music videos. I again, you can disagree with me or not, but fact is, the montages in this movie, and they continue and help. And then even after the Beatles stopped touring because it's too crazy for them, what they would do was they would make short videos and send them to TV studios. Hey, can't get there, but here's a little something for you. And it's the music video. Right. Just not called the music video at the time.
Well, Elvis did it a decade earlier, only he made it into a feature-length movies as well, like Jailhouse Rock.
Right.
It was a whole movie, but everyone remembers that whole title sequence.
Right.
So, well, since we're on the subject of music, I'm going to segue into another 1964. This is part of the French New Wave. Jacques Demy, who happened to be the spouse of Agnès Varda. Mm-hmm. In 1964, Jacques Demy, with music by Michel Legrand, Catherine Deneuve. Basically, she's one of two stars. They're young lovers in the French city of Cherbourg, the Umbrellas of Cherbourg. Now, and I'm not good with French, but this film's dialogue is, they call it a musical, Adam, but it's opera because they sing all of the lines. There's not one spoken line. It's all sung. Yeah. The entire movie. So when I was watching this, I didn't watch it from the beginning when I first viewed it on TV. It was on Turner Classic Movies. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I don't know if I can sit through this because it's an opera. It's a musical, but yet it's an opera. It's very interesting. They're having a casual conversation and they're singing it.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen anything like it before. I haven't seen anything like it since. So, I mean, it was what Jacques Demy called this the middle part of an informal romantic trilogy. It literally came after his film debut, Lola, which he made a couple of movies in between Lola. But there's a character, one of the main characters in Lola, he reappears in Umbrellas of Cherbourg. So I watched Umbrellas of Cherbourg before I watched Lola, which is also a masterpiece. But it was huge. This movie was a huge success. You know, it made almost $8 million at the box office, which for 1964, that's pretty incredible. And it's regarded as one of the greatest musicals of all time. Now, obviously, when a movie comes out, you can't say this is one of the greatest of all time. You have to see the legacy of it.
Right.
And there was actually, the title track was actually sung in the English language, and it became a huge top 40 hit as well. So, I mean, at the time, it was pretty popular. But the movie's split into 3 parts. You know, basically this young couple, they fall madly in love with each other. Okay, there's going to be some spoiler alerts in here. I wish you would see this, Adam, because I know you're not a musical. You don't like watching musicals, right?
I don't have any issues with watching musicals.
I for some reason I thought it wasn't your cup of tea.
No.
So I probably should have asked you about it before we hit the record button. But no, it's got the romance part of it. It's the colors. That's one thing Jacques Demy, when he started making movies in color, the colors are like a character in itself too. Mm-hmm. But you basically, you get this young couple. This guy works at, he was a mechanic.
Yeah. And
Jacques Demy, actually, his dad was a mechanic. So there's some personal stuff worked in here as well. But he's in love with this young girl. He's 20, she's 17, which is kind of a big deal when you're that age. But she works for her mom. Her mom owns this umbrella shop. So Umbrellas of Cherbourg. So basically they fall in love. They're really into each other. And he's got a sickly aunt who's very encouraging for him, but her mom's kind of overbearing and, oh, you don't want to end up with this guy. You don't want to make the same mistake. But he's drafted because when this movie takes place, it's in 1957. And at that time, France was a huge Algerian war. I don't know if you know much about it. I know a little bit because they made a movie called The Battle of Algiers a couple of years after this movie. But he's drafted into the Algerian war. He has to go away for 2 years. Mm-hmm. That's it, 2 years. And that's like devastating for them. And he's just like, wait for me. I'll be back. And then, the second part of the story is the absence. It focuses on her, how she deals with it. She's pregnant because they, do the thing before he leaves, but she's pregnant, and his replies are kind of sporadic. She's constantly writing him, I can only imagine being at war trying, oh, here's your mail. It's not like perfect. Probably sometimes, he has to move around and no one knows where he's going to be. And he does get wounded though, apparently. And then she thinks, oh, he's probably gone. So she gets all this pressure from her mom. And so she meets up with this guy, this who's like a traveling jeweler of sorts, a very mysterious guy, but the same guy who was in the movie Lola that I was telling you about. Mm-hmm. He shows up. He's grown up quite a bit because in the movie Lola, he's really immature and he treats Lola like crap, basically. But this time around, he's more understanding. So it's kind of interesting how Lola he grew up and he matured and became a more understanding guy because she tells him, hey, this guy before he went to war got me pregnant and he's very understanding. We'll raise the kid together. Mm-hmm. So she's convinced, oh my God, that he passed that. That was the test, and they get married. But as you know, with tragic love stories, he comes back. Mm-hmm. He's limping from his injury and finds the umbrella shop closed down, and his aunt's still alive, but not for much longer. And the ending of this movie, Adam, just leaves me like, wow, every time. Mm-hmm. Wow, every time, because, I'm going to give a spoiler. This is a spoiler alert. If you haven't seen it yet, just turn the volume down a little bit or skip to the next part. So he falls in love with a woman who's like a caretaker for his aunt. She's kind of in the background the whole movie. You don't expect anything to come of it because they don't really focus on her. But boom, she's been waiting for that opportunity. And when she gets married, you see her from a distance, like all smiles and everything because like, oh, I have a chance. And they do fall in love. They get married. He buys a gas station because he kind of mentioned that to Catherine Deneuve's character at the beginning of the movie. That's his dream. He wants to open up a gas station and stuff. So at the end, it's around Christmas time, and it's 1964, and Catherine Deneuve's character pulls up to get her gas filled. He sees his daughter in the car, and you know the stereotypical movie would be like, oh, they have an altercation, they find each other again. It's very cold, it's very distant, and they both leave and they both go back to their separate ways. It's just the way it was handled was like, wow, this is like life.
Yeah.
Because he's got his wife and his boy, they went out, his wife and the boy went out shopping, window shopping for Christmas, and they just have an interaction, but it's very like cold and distant. I mean, he really just didn't want anything to do with her after that, and it's sad because that's his daughter in the car,
Right.
So it was just shocking how the movie ends. It's just with how little is said between them at the end of the movie.
Right.
So I highly recommend Umbrellas of Cherbourg. Yeah, if you've got that whole mindset, oh, this is a typical musical. No, it's not. French New Wave, they were shooting on all cylinders by the time this movie came out. And Jacques Demy is interesting. He didn't make the typical French New Wave films. Mm-hmm. He really did not. And I highly recommend Lola and then watch Umbrellas of Cherbourg. Those are his 2 5-star movies. So what's next on your list, Adam?
Next is a movie that I'm almost certain that everybody in the world is familiar with, and that is 1964 Goldfinger. This is the 3rd movie in the James Bond series featuring the one and only Sean Connery.
It was my first James Bond movie.
Your first James Bond movie?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was my introduction to James Bond.
Awesome. Well, I mean, what better way? I mean, Goldfinger is a classic among classics.
The first 3 Bond movies are the best, in my opinion.
It's hard to argue that. I mean, Dr. No from Russia with Love and Goldfinger. I mean, they're awesome. They're awesome movies. And, Goldfinger, is probably the best of the 3. Arguably.
So your first time watching Goldfinger, where were you? How old were you?
Oh man, I've been watching these movies since I was a kid, so I couldn't even tell you.
Was Goldfinger your first Bond movie?
No, my first Bond movie was GoldenEye.
Really?
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah. That started me down the rabbit hole. So it was around 96 is when I saw GoldenEye, and that set me down the Bond rabbit hole.
Gotcha.
So I couldn't really tell you where or when I saw it, but I did see it.
But it made an impact, obviously, because it stuck out.
Yeah. I mean,
so what made it stick out for you?
Goldfinger? I mean,
yeah.
It's just a cool movie. The odd job man with the the hat and the razor blade, the razor blade. It's again. I think it's Sean Connery as at his best as 007. I love the between him and Goldfinger the one-upmanship competition that they established early on in the movie. When Goldfinger's obviously cheating at the card game and Bond catches him and forces him to lose. The
high-pitched sound effect.
Yeah, forces him to lose, and then obviously you get the golf game between the two where they're betting on the gold bar, and at the very end James Bond calls him on using the wrong ball, which causes Goldfinger to forfeit, and
dropping the gold brick on there to distract him.
Yep.
Oh, there's so many memorable sequences in Goldfinger. Watching those early James Bond movies, my father had all of the Ian Fleming novels, so I went down the rabbit hole of reading the Ian Fleming books. And wow. And that's why I guess I didn't like Roger Moore so much, because like because Live and Let Die is the first James Bond book ever. And it's like, wow, this is nothing like the movie, you know? But
Yeah.
I mean, Goldfinger, Dr. No, and From Russia with Love they stick closest to the book out of all of the movies.
Yeah.
Those are the three that were so close to the books. And I think that's probably why they were so good.
Right.
Because the Broccoli's and the filmmakers had they were like, okay, we're really passionate about this. They started going downhill in quality with Thunderballs. Thunderball was still very entertaining, but then it's just like Diamonds Are Forever was it kind of went back up a little bit with You Only Live Twice, and then I started really losing interest in the Bond movies.
Yeah.
I did I think still to this day, the best written Bond on Her Majesty's Secret Service. That is the best written Bond. And then right after that, it just down. And then GoldenEye was good, and then Daniel Craig came along with Casino Royale, which was really good, and it kind of went down a little bit. And then Skyfall was amazing, and then it went way down again.
Right.
A lot of ebbs and flows in the Bond.
Yeah.
But the first three, and Goldfinger included, are just amazing films.
Right. And the one thing I always like, when we're talking about our stuff here on the show and what I just talking about movies in general with people, one thing I loved about the Bond movies, in particular, I mean, until we really got to the Daniel Craig series, each movie was its own story. You didn't need to watch From Russia with Love to watch Goldfinger. You didn't need to watch Dr. No. And I really do believe, with our big franchises now today, that's what we need instead of these 3-movie trilogies and then restart it over with another origin story movie. So like, how, if you're going horror, instead of doing yet another, 3 movies about Michael Myers chasing whoever, just do a Halloween movie. just write a good movie and just do a random installment. And I think the fans would really, really appreciate that. Same thing with the superhero genre. Instead of giving us Batman's origin story for the 4th and 5th, 6th time, let's just write a damn good Batman story and film and make a good Batman movie. We don't need to know that his parents were killed when he was a child again for the 100th time. Same thing with
even simpler, Adam. Write a good movie.
Yeah.
Just write a good movie. It doesn't matter what it is. Create something, and even if it's something you think we've seen a zillion times, create it in a way like Scorsese would, like Bong Joon-ho would, like Park Chan-wook. Something you've seen 1,000 times, but make it seem like it's something we've never seen before. It can happen. There are films every year that are released that make you go, wow. And we need more of that from the younger filmmakers. Because, I mean, Bong Joon-ho, he's in his 50s. Christopher Nolan, once in a great while, comes out with something surprising. I think he's overrated. But Dunkirk, if he can make another movie like Dunkirk that just... He doesn't over-explain and overdo everything.
Well, I'll use Chris Nolan as a perfect example of that. So, he had his Batman trilogy, all right? But The Dark Knight in the middle of that trilogy was something that we've never seen before, and you did not have to watch Batman Begins to watch it, and you didn't have to watch the follow-up to enjoy it either. It was a Batman story that was just awesome.
But again, we've seen that kind of story 1,000 times, but the way Christopher Nolan presented those 3 movies felt fresh,
right?
Didn't it?
Yeah, but I'll argue that I didn't need to see Batman's origin story again.
But his Batman origin story was closest to the comic book. It was his. He had to do it that way. He had a 3-part story arc. I don't mind that. You're right. We didn't need another one after his trilogy. You know, it was like we got another one with Ben Affleck, and then we got yet another one with Robert Pattinson. Now, the Robert Pattinson Batman was actually quite good if they cut all of the backstory part out, it would have been a good hour, 45-minute, 2-hour movie. They bloated it out to 3 hours. But anyway.
So, just the point I'm trying to get,
Make a good movie.
When we're talking about these franchises that everybody loves and everybody wants to see sequels and everybody wants more of, instead of going down the rabbit hole of having to re-explain the story for the 100th time, every 3 or 4 movies, just make a good movie.
Right.
And give it to the fans, and that's what the fans want.
Right. So we're talking about Sean Connery. In 1964, he made he was in an amazing film directed by the great Alfred Hitchcock. This is a movie that a lot of people would refer to as lesser Hitchcock, which kind of bothers me because it's a masterpiece. Marnie. Have you heard about it?
I've heard of it, yep.
Well, you really should see it. The problem is he was fresh off the birds. So, great. Suspense, horror, can't wait. Marnie is a very psychological movie dealing with trauma. And that's a hard thing to wrap around people's minds because the movie has its pace. If you're patient with it, there's a lot of rewards. I didn't find the movie to be boring at all. I've never sat through an Alfred Hitchcock movie. Oh, this is boring. But some people did. I mean, this movie did make its, it made more than its budget, but it's still considered a lesser Hitchcock movie. But again, if we want to talk about a lesser Hitchcock movie, that's like a great movie for someone else. So we were talking about Sean Connery at the time. He had Goldfinger. He had his Bond movies. He was quite concerned. He was under contract to Eon Productions for both Bond and non-James Bond movies. Yep. He was worried about limiting his career. He turned down every non-Bond movie at that point, which is quite interesting. And when asked what he wanted to do, Connery replied that he wanted to work with Hitchcock. So Eon arranged through their contracts, and lo and behold, Connery was shocked, also shocked many people at the time, by asking to see a script, something that Connery did. He didn't want to be typecast as a spy.
Yeah.
He wanted to do something different. And in my opinion, Connery made probably his most interesting roles in between all the Bond movies. And this was one of them. So Connery, didn't want to be typecast. He was worried that this Hitchcock movie would be like North by Northwest. Yeah. Which is a spy kind of scenario. Right, yeah. He didn't want to be involved in that. When told by Hitchcock's agents, that Cary Grant didn't even want to see one of Hitchcock's scripts, Connery replied, "I'm not Cary Grant." So Hitchcock and Connery got on well during the filming. Obviously, he agreed to do it. And I guess he was happy with it, but with certain reservations. I don't know. I thought it was an amazing movie, and it was something different for Connery. Because he's like this, I don't want to say the rich playboy, but he took over his father's business, his father's insurance company, and he makes a ton of money. Yeah. And he's just totally enamored with Marnie. It wasn't like Vertigo where he became obsessed like James Stewart's character, but he was like, hey, I really think this woman's attractive. And you couldn't make this movie today, obviously, because there'd be a lot of controversies with how the male is treating the female and all that kind of stuff. But so Alfred Hitchcock began developing this film adaptation. It's a novel by Winston Graham. It's called Marnie as well. It came out in 1961. So the screenwriter of Hitchcock's recently released Psycho was part of it too. I guess he made some extensive notes, 161-page treatment. Now, Grace Kelly was supposed to play Marnie. She was Princess Grace at the time. She accepted it, but in Monaco, the reaction to the announcement, it was written, they did not like the idea of their princess being filmed kissing another man. Now, Monaco is a very strict country, and she had to follow certain rules. She never really made a film after like the a certain point in the 50s.
You're right.
But it would have been a great role. I can't see anyone other than Tippi Hedren doing this role. I know Tippi Hedren really relished the role because I don't think she really thought of much of her role in The Birds, but she really kind of was excited about this opportunity. It's a character that she actually has some depth to her. She can actually, do some acting in it, So it's also like it's a film about a sexually disturbed thief. On our YouTube channel,
men.
send us messages through our
because of
social
an
media.
incident
We're
when
on
she was a
Instagram,
child.
Facebook, Twitter.
Just
and
reach
again,
out, let us know what you think,
I'm
and
not
give us
going to
some
give you a
feedback or
spoiler on
requests,
this
too.
one because if I give you a spoiler, it may ruin it's best to be know somewhat about this movie. I don't want to spell the whole movie out because it's just such a rewarding film, a very emotional film at the end as well. Because, it's just some of the subject matter they had to kind of dance around, rape, and prostitution. It didn't really come out and say that stuff in the 60s, even though I think if the movie came out in the late 60s, early 70s in Hollywood, when the studio system had collapsed at that point, it might have been a different thing, but still kind of controversial, talking about, children, rape, and prostitution all in the same movie. It's kind of heavy stuff.
You think?
But there was a draft containing a rape scene, but they pleaded with Hitchcock to use a different version instead. So there was a lot of fighting with the script and the movie again. It did okay. It really did okay. A $3 million budget. The box office was $7 million. But still, it's not a film that when people think of Hitchcock, that's not a film that comes to mind. And I honestly think if you're new to Hitchcock, I would be adventurous and try this above some of his more well-known stuff. Just to give you an idea, yes, he is the master of suspense. There is a lot of suspense in this movie, but the way he does it, it's a little different. It's a masterclass in filmmaking, and I think it's awesome. I know there was some stuff. Tippi Hedren claimed that Hitchcock made sexual overtures to her during the making of the movie. According to her, he pressured her sexually all the more blatantly, crudely, and cruelly. I guess Hedren did not yield to his advances. She asked to be released from her contract, but he refused. But again, in an interview, she says how much she enjoyed playing Marnie.
I mean, who knows? I mean, we all know the rumors and stories about Hitchcock and how he felt about Pretty Blondes. So yeah. I mean, take that with a big grain of salt. To me, that's just like you said, she's kind of contradicting herself. One minute she's saying how much she loved the movie and the role, and then the next, it's bash Hitchcock. So I mean, yeah, did Hitchcock have his faults like every human being? Yeah, I mean, but
but yeah, again, at the time, critics' reviews were mixed. But again, it's just one of those films that's just build a huge following over time. Right. More and more people see it. They're like, wow, this is actually an amazing film. Because some of his films in his later period, I would kind of agree to a certain sense that it's lesser Hitchcock. But again, when you're saying, oh, it's a lesser Hitchcock, it's still a great movie.
Yeah.
It's still an amazing piece of film. And Marnie is just itching to be watched by more people. So, and again, all of Hitchcock's major Universal movies have been re-released on 4K. And this actually is in the recent 4K box set that just came out. I think it was late last year. So highly recommend Marnie. That's an easy 5-star movie for me.
Alrighty.
What's next for you, Adam?
So next, 1964. I'm actually going to do a deep cut here. That's
a deep cut?
Yeah. That
you usually hear that in music terms, Adam.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, I am the maestro of the macabre. So this movie is called Witchcraft. 1964, starring the Wolfman himself, Lon Chaney Jr., Jack Hedley, and Jill Dixon. Jill Dixon, directed by Don Sharp.
This is one of the ultimate B movies.
This is definitely cult B movie, and it's to me it's a gem. I watched it. I've heard about it. I've read about it, and was able to watch it for the first time. Thank you, Tubi.
Tubi has a lot of good stuff on there.
The other night, and it's really good. So basically, the plot of this movie is you got two families. You got the Whitlock family and the Lanier family, in a forever feud over land and property, and their greed and accusations of witchcraft and this and that. And then it brings us to modern time, where the Lanier family has actually, through the legal system, purchased parts of the Whitlock family's property, and they are now, they're expanding its progress. They're looking to build stores and expand whatever into this family's property. And like the very first scene of the movie is a particularly powerful one that you don't really expect, and it's seeing people bulldoze a cemetery. And
wow.
And this is our first shot of Lon Chaney Jr. trying to prevent them from doing that, and he's not really successful. And this starts, this movie starts with this whole feud about desecrating the cemetery and invading this property, and you see the tensions between the two families, and then of course two of the members of each family fall in love with each other. And during the desecration of this cemetery, Vanessa Whitlock is released from her tomb. She is our witch, and the Lanier family start mysteriously dying. And it becomes who did it? Well, of course it was the Whitlock family who did it, but they don't know that Vanessa is back, and it plays from there. And very interesting, very I would say give it a watch. It's again, it's very unknown. It's interesting. It's fun. It's just cool. It was a different take on what you were normally seeing these days, especially with the whole witchcraft angle and stuff like that.
Well, it's one of Lon Chaney Jr.'s later movies. He died pretty young.
He
was only 60-something when he died.
Yeah, but I mean, the guy looked 80 from.
Yeah, I know, because it's unfortunate. I think he probably drank a lot. I think
he had a huge drinking problem,
yeah.
and it was legendary. Yeah, he died in 71. So
this is kind of near the twilight of his career,
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I miss 73. He died at 67. Not 71.
But still, this is like the back half of his career.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not going to lie. Poor Creighton looks rough in this movie, and you can tell his voice is shot. Yeah. He doesn't have that loud, booming voice that we see in the Wolfman and the sequels to the Wolfman, and
even High Noon, his little small part in that.
Yeah, I mean, his voice is shot. It's raspy. He's over, but it's still Lon Chaney Jr. and he still has a presence, and he's still as intense as ever. He just it's just an older Lon Chaney. But I highly recommend this. Again, free on Tubi. Check out Witchcraft. Again, it kind of has all the typical stereotypes you expect in like a witchcraft or a witch trials type movie. But it was done well. I can't, I'm still kind of processing it from seeing it from the first time, but it was worth watching.
So it's like a low budget B movie,
but it has a great story arc to it.
Yeah,
a wonderful story to it, and again, you kind of got the Hatfield and McCoy rivalry. And instead of Wild West setting, we're talking witchcraft.
Right.
So it
sounds like something like the Hammer Studios would have done.
Yes. Which will lead into my next pick, but we'll go with your pick next.
Okay. Well, let's 1964 was quite the year for film. So since we were talking a little bit about horror films, there was this anthology film from Japan from Masaki Kobayashi called Kwaidan. Now, Kaidan means ghost story. So you got 4 ghost stories. And again, this was another one. I'd worked at a fast food restaurant, came home. I lived with my parents at the time. I was in high school. And I was just like, I'm not ready to go to bed. It was like 1 or 2 in the morning. I turned on, I don't even remember what channel it was on, Adam. I just had it on. And it was this very interesting, it was obviously an Asian film that I was watching, recreating this famous battle. There was this blind guy. He was singing this song about an infamous battle. And little did I know that I hadn't watched the first 2 stories to it. This was the 3rd story, Hoichi the Earless. It's interesting. It's the tale of the Haiki. It's in the book. It's actually based on a book, but it's very interesting how I watched it. I picked it up literally near the beginning of the 3rd part of the story, and I watched again. I watched an hour and 20 minutes. So I was like, wait, I gotta find out what this movie is, and then it said on the TV Kwaidan, and I'm like, I've got to do more research on this movie, and I just fell in love with this film. It's based on stories from this guy named Lafcadio Hearn. He was an Irish writer, translator, and teacher who introduced the culture and literature of Japan to the West. It's interesting, a Japanese filmmaker adapting a Western guy's interpretation of Japanese culture. It's very interesting. But this guy was really into it. I mean, he literally, he was born Patrick Lafcadio Hearn, and his Japanese name was Yakumo Koizumi. So he wrote this, he was really into Japanese culture. And this film, I mean, you watch it, you think it was written by a Japanese guy. Yeah. That's how into the culture he was. But I sought out the original version, and of course Criterion had the DVD, but I bought the VHS. It was a 2-tape VHS, 2 hours and 41 minutes, and then when I got the DVD through Criterion, and then lo and behold, it was like 2015, 2016. I had 161 minutes, and then I see the Criterion was releasing a Blu-ray of Kwaidan, 183 minutes. Whoa, there's like 20 some odd minutes extra. Apparently, just like every other movie that's released in the United States at the time, whether it was Italian with The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or Japanese, apparently, they trimmed 20-something minutes out of the movie. And it's like, what am I missing? So, again, my wife, God bless her for, my movie obsessions here, but I had to get it because I've loved this movie. It's one of the greatest movies I've ever seen. So I had to get the 183-minute version. I guess that's the complete version that premiered at the Cannes Film Festival and actually won a special jury prize.
Oh, wow.
So this Masaki Kobayashi, just so you know, I mean, just to wrap your head around it at the time, the guy was known for his period dramas. This guy had done The Human Condition, a 9.5-hour study of an idealist who just freezes to death, literally. And it's quite the saga. It's not 9.5 hours altogether. They split it up into 3 movies, but it's quite the film. And he also did a samurai. He's known for some of his samurai films. Yeah, and then he does this movie, which is there are samurai in it, but it's like ghost stories.
Oh wow!
So it's not scary, but let me just tell you, I was 14, 15 years old watching this, and when I turned out the lights, I was kind of like, oh boy, I had to use the flashlight.
Gives you the creeps.
It has an atmosphere to it, and the score. It's not so much a score, but it's like different sound effects, and it's it's quite unsettling in certain parts. It's not violent, it's not gory, but it's very unsettling, and the images stay with you.
Mm-hmm.
So I was happy I finally had time. During the week, I can't just sit down and watch a 3-hour movie, Adam.
No.
So I have to wait and hopefully pray that I have time on the weekends. And, I just had laryngitis, so it was the perfect time to sit down, be silent, watch a movie. And this is a good one to get lost in because he was an artist. He was a painter, and you can literally see all of his paintings literally come to life. It was an incredible film. But yeah, I mean, thankfully we have the 183-minute version. That is the one I recommend because that was the original cut of the film. So I'm very happy to recommend Qui-Gon to everybody. You're a fan of horror, Adam.
Right.
You've got to see it too.
I'll definitely check it out. Yeah.
It's good stuff.
All right. So we'll go with my next pick here. And as we mentioned before, Hammer Horror. Well, this is where we're headed. In its third installment of its Frankenstein series, we're going to talk The Evil of Frankenstein. Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Yeah. This was not one of their best efforts.
So how many, before you go further, there was several Frankenstein movies, and Peter Cushing always played Frankenstein.
Yeah, and he managed to come back to life after,
somehow he has
the noose, the guillotine,
Well, you don't see him hang in the Curse of Frankenstein.
No.
He's saved at the last minute in The Revenge of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
So tell us about...
this is the third movie, Evil of Frankenstein.
Yeah, so what's the plot of this one?
All right, so basically, Frankenstein is hit it again. A child witnesses an intruder stealing a corpse from a family plot. And, we encounter Baron Victor Frankenstein up to his old, his usual, trying to defy death. And the interesting twist is the monster in this movie is not something he creates on the spot like he has in other movies.
Yeah.
This is actually a prototype he finds frozen. His original prototype for the creature, before we get the Christopher Lee creature in The Curse of Frankenstein. And believe it or not, the monster looks very similar to Jack Pierce's Frankenstein's monster.
Wow.
This is the first.
Yeah, because they actually okay, to hell with it. We'll go all Universal here.
Yeah,
because that was one thing they were adamant about when they made The Curse of Frankenstein. We're not going to do anything like Universal.
Yes, and they went there.
Yeah, they went there
because the monster now has the giant brown forehead and the flat head and is all green and doesn't look exactly like the Karloff monster, but very similar. What leads one to believe that maybe Universal wasn't too happy
probably
with what they did here.
And maybe they were trying to give them the middle finger with this. Who knows? But it's like lesser Hammer film, unfortunately.
Yeah. Reading here, if there was any sort of lawsuit, I do know they were kind of put on notice by Universal.
Oh, I'm sure
to ease up a little bit, but no real lawsuits or copyright infringement was ever filed by Universal. Critically, this was not really well received. It was described as dismal and the worst of the Hammer Frankenstein films in the series. Even Rotten Tomatoes, if you believe that, gives it a 57%. But it's part of the legacy.
It's still entertaining, though.
Well, of course.
It's still entertaining. It's it's
you got. You got gothic horror. You got Peter Cushing. You got the Frankenstein monster. It's a recipe for success,
right?
And it's definitely built a cult following over the years.
Oh, of course.
It's shown every Halloween on TCM, and it's become one of those staples. But at the time, it was not favored well at all. But just like all of our favorite monsters, it wears on you, it grows on you.
Right. I think there was like at least 8 of these that Hammer did with Peter Cushing as Frankenstein.
There was so many.
And he did
same
just
thing
like what they
Dracula.
did with Van Helsing. You know, it was even though Christopher Lee wasn't Dracula, they would always have a Dracula movie with Peter Cushing as Van Helsing.
And you know what?
Even did you ever see the Shaw Brothers Hammer crossover production, The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires?
No, I have to see.
There's a Dracula right at the beginning.
Yeah,
and then you have David Chiang, hiya, hiya, with vampires.
But I mean, again,
anyway,
tip the hat to Peter Cushing. He saw a paycheck. And
well, you got to remember. You got to remember. We talked about this already with Frankenstein. He was just doing TV commercials. He was kind of unemployed, so this made him gainfully employed, and he had a lot of great work. And some of those Hammer films, Captain Clegg comes to mind as like one of the bright, shining examples of Peter Cushing's brilliance.
Sure,
but anyway.
But Evil Frankenstein. I mean,
it's worth watching. It's entertaining.
It's worth watching. And again, it's one of those movies that you're always finding on cable TV, especially around the Halloween time of the year. If you haven't seen it, check it out. I know you've seen the image of the monster.
Oh, of course.
I mean, I would even go as far to say as far in the Hammer universe, this image of the Frankenstein monster is used even more so than the Christopher Lee version of the monster, just because it's so more identical to the Karloff monster. So when you're looking for publicity, for Hammer, this is the one that's usually brought up. This image of the monster, right? Even though clearly the Curse of Frankenstein with Christopher Lee as a monster, way better film.
Oh, much better.
And again, also, remember as you're watching this movie, like with the other Hammer movies, nothing to do with the novel.
No,
it's all in name and character names, and they do their own thing with it, which again, I love.
Yeah,
and it's like we were just talking about with the Bond movies and other movies. Take the characters you love and write a good movie around it and have fun with it.
I would take a lesser Hammer film over a Marvel, over one of the Halloween movies any day. The Halloween sequel movies.
Well, you've only seen one of the Halloween sequel movies.
I've seen 2 of them.
Wait, you saw the first one? You saw 5, which is the worst sequel you could probably watch.
And then I watched Rob Zombie.
Then you watched Rob Zombie, which wasn't a sequel. It was a reboot.
Well, still. I would rather watch a Hammer film than the rest of those.
All right.
I've seen part 2, just so you know. It's not like I haven't seen any of those.
Right.
I've seen parts of those movies here and there. The only one I haven't really seen parts of is the last 3 and also part 3, which I do want to sit through part 3. I've heard mixed reviews on it, but
we want to talk about a cult movie. Part 3 is a huge cult movie.
But yeah, I love the Hammer films. You give me those any day, and I put them on my watch list over any of those Halloween movies or any of the Chuck.
They're classics. They're
classics, fun. And they're only 80 minutes too, which is great. So we're talking about copycats. Hammer eventually copied Universal. They didn't get sued. Well, Sergio Leone, his first movie is literally a spin-off of Yojimbo. We're talking about A Fistful of Dollars. And yeah, Leone had no idea, apparently, that it had anything to do with it. But even his producer's like, come on, man, it's the same movie. You got an outlaw, which is not too much different than an unemployed samurai looking for work. So he comes to this town with 2 bosses. That's what Clint Eastwood refers to him. A town with 2 bosses. Very interesting. That's a summarization. We don't know the name of this stranger. Again, this is Clint Eastwood's first starring role because he had been in Rawhide for years in the 50s, early 60s. So went over to Spain and Italy to make his very first starring role.
Yeah.
So he's an unnamed stranger. He arrives at the little town of San Miguel, which is Mexican-United States border town, and finds there's a feud between the two bosses who are smuggler families, again, trying to gain control of the town, just like Yojimbo.
Yep.
Two Yakuza bosses trying to take control of the town. You know, you got the Rojo brothers, and then you got the family compromising the town sheriff. So they're at odds with each other. So Clint Eastwood, he's seeking money. What can I do? Let's pit the two against each other. That's exactly what Toshiro Mifune's Yojimbo did. Instead of a toothpick like Toshiro Mifune had, Clint Eastwood had a cigar. Wreaks havoc on the town. Again, it's a story that, you know, Kurosawa did laid out a whole lot better, executed a whole lot better. But there was something there with Leone because every film he made after Fistful of Dollars would get better and better and better. The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West, among the two greatest movies ever made. And the guy only made 6 or 7 movies. And this was his very first one. I highly recommend it. You know, again, the music, Ennio Morricone is by far the greatest film composer I've ever heard. He captures the time, the place better than any other film composer I've ever heard. But I mean, the guy made like 300 something scores in his life. Let's put it this way. When The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly came out, Ennio Morricone had another score, The Battle of Algiers. Completely different, very complex scores, just an amazing composer. And Leone, his attention to detail is kind of like on Kubrick kind of level. Not in this movie. Again, he was finding his footing, and then for a few dollars more, he'd get even more epic, and then boom, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Once Upon a Time in the West, he'd reach like operatic. It's just such a brilliant start to a great career. He did have to pay a lot of money to Akira Kurosawa because let's face it, the same exact movie as Yojimbo, he just had to change the character names, the setting. There's very few differences in the plot.
Right.
It's the same movie. But it's awesome. Kurosawa's influence over world cinema is just unmatched. Look at Fistful of Dollars turned into Last Man Standing with Bruce Willis in the 90s. Not good, but the influence was there, just like Kurosawa's influence on The Magnificent Seven, A Bug's Life. Runaway Train was a screenplay co-written by Kurosawa. Remember that movie with John Voight, Eric Roberts?
Yep.
That was a movie he was supposed to direct.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Hollywood just didn't sit well with him because he was also supposed to direct Tora, Tora, Tora. But anyway, Fistful of Dollars, Sergio Leone's amazing film debut.
Alrighty, for my final pick of this list, I'm going with one of my all-time favorites, Roger Corman, 7th of 8 Edgar Allan Poe themed movies starring the legendary, the iconic Vincent Price. I have 3 movies of his that I just absolutely love. Fall of the House of Usher.
That is good.
The Pit and the Pendulum. And this one from 1964, Mask of the Red Death. If you haven't seen any of those 3 movies, I strongly recommend them.
The Fall of House Usher has a young Jack Nicholson in it.
Yes. Yep.
Young.
Yeah, very young. Like Corman's movies, this is taken from the Edgar Allan Poe short story of the same name. Basically, what we got here is we got Vincent Price. He's the prince and terrorizes a plague-ridden pleasantry while merrymaking in a lonely castle with his jaded courtiers. So you kind of got this weird, isolated castle of just sadists and just a little bit of everything, all here to entertain Vincent Price.
Roger Corman and sadist kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah. It takes place in medieval Italy, and it just goes from there. You know, people are inflicted by, the plague known as the Red Death. Long story short, it basically, the Red Death follows our female heroine into the castle and plagues the rest of everybody else in the castle. I mean, you want to talk about a color palette in movies. I mean, the bright colors used in this movie to represent different feelings and different emotions. And then obviously you got the bright red, beautifully shot, movie, an interesting movie, something that it holds your attention from beginning to end. I mean, the very first shot of the movie is we see this red cloaked figure with tarot cards. It just captures your imagination, and then it ends with said person with the tarot cards, creature or entity, whatever it is, with
kind of mysterious. They don't really
they don't really tell, joined by the other colors and the other elements that we've discovered throughout the rest of the movie joining him. Vincent Price is just a monster in this movie. He's at the height of his Vincent Price powers. He's just so good in it, and being this evil, twisted prince looking to get his way with everything. Mask of the Red Death, go out of your way to find it.
You were talking about the color palettes. It's amazing because I can't remember how close in proximity it came out, but the Tomb of Ligeia, similar time frame, but that was another movie where the colors just popped. It's like Roger Corman knew exactly what to do with colors in his movies.
So I just found the notes. All the colors mean.
There's always a meaning to the colors.
There's always a meaning to the colors, and this is really interesting. So the Red Death represents anthrax. This is the cloaked figure, the surviving girl using the tarot cards, kind of sets up the story, and then he's joined later, like I said, by the different colors. White meaning tuberculosis, yellow meaning yellow fever, orange meaning scurvy, blue meaning cholera, violet meaning influenza, and then the black being the bubonic plague.
The problematic stuff in the Middle Ages.
Yes. So. Each color just represented so vividly. It's cool to kind of see how each color plays a different...
Right.
But, our Red Death being anthrax is what we're talking about in this movie. Darkness, decay, the Red Death, being held as the ultimate domination overall.
People don't realize, like horror movies, Suspiria and like Vertigo, Hitchcock, colors are almost like a character amongst themselves. Mm-hmm. They really are.
Roger Corman, always said that he felt Mask of the Red Death and Fall of the House Shall were his two best Poe movies. The Mask of the Red Death is the follow-up to Fall of the House of Usher. It's one of these movies that you just got to watch to experience.
That one I have not had the opportunity to watch. I did try The Pit and the Pendulum years ago. I had a hard time with that movie, but I did really like The Fall of House Usher. That was really a well-done movie.
Yeah.
Very B-movie-ish, but man, it was just well done. It was well written, well executed. Mm-hmm. I kind of agree with him. That's the best one I've seen so far.
Right.
I haven't seen that many of Corman productions, but I got to delve into that a little bit.
Give it a watch. If you're a Corman fan, a Edgar Allan Poe fan, a Vincent Price fan, this is everything you're looking for and more. Mask of the Red Death, 1964. That's going to be my top pick in this list of movies from 1964, at least for this podcast.
Right. So I had, when it comes to 1964, there was like a three-way tie of my favorite films from 1964. I already talked about two of them, Marnie and Qui-Gon. You can't have any 1964 list without even talking about Kubrick's masterpiece, Dr. Strangelove. Remember that? Did you ever watch that one, Adam?
Oh, yeah.
Or How I Stopped Worrying and Love the Bomb. This film, I'm telling you, what a history. Stanley Kubrick, when he was working on this film, he had nothing but a vague idea.
Yeah.
Nothing but a vague idea. But he wanted to make a thriller about a nuclear accident that built on the whole Cold War hysteria at the time.
Yeah.
So he was doing his research. You want to talk about a guy who does research for his movies.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there's movies upon movies the guy wanted to make, but it's just the research.
Yeah.
So Kubrick gradually became aware of the subtle and the paradoxical balance of terror, if you will, between the nuclear powers. At Kubrick's request, the head of the Institute for Strategic Studies recommended the thriller novel Red Alert by Peter George. Kubrick was impressed with the book, which had also been praised by some Nobel Peace Prize winners. So Kubrick was impressed. He bought the film rights, and in collaboration with Peter George, the guy who wrote the book. That was a cool thing about Kubrick for a while there. For some of his movies, this one and especially 2001, he literally had the author working with him on this stuff. So Kubrick started writing a screenplay based on the book, and while writing the screenplay, they benefited from some brief consultations And following the tone of the book, Kubrick wanted to film the story as a serious drama. So he wanted to do a thriller. He really did. However, Kubrick, the genius that he was, he began to see comedy in the idea of mutual assured destruction as he wrote the first draft. Now, he later, he said in one of his biographies, my idea of doing it as a nightmare comedy came in the early weeks of working on the script. I found that in trying to put meat on the bones and to imagine the scenes fully, one had to keep leaving out of things which were either absurd or paradoxical. So in order to keep it from being funny, and these things seem to be close to the heart of the scenes in question. So... So, other titles. I don't know how well do you know this movie, Adam?
Just I've seen it like a couple times, and
No big deal, huh?
No big deal.
Seen one of the greatest movies ever made. No big deal. It didn't really jive with you.
It was okay. Wow. I mean, I don't know. It's Doctor Strangelove. It's one of the greatest of all time. So I watched it. It was good. I mean,
Did you think people overhyped it, or?
No, I mean,
there's no fighting in here. This is the war room. That's one of the best lines ever.
Yeah, no, I guess like the way you watch movies and the way I watch movies is different. So you can tell me it's the greatest movie of all time, and I'll be like, yeah, it's good. It's just
wow. But some of the titles he was considering were Dr. Doomsday or How to Start World War III Without Even Trying.
That would have been a hilarious.
Oh, another one.
Title.
This would never have flied, pun intended. Dr. Strangelove's Secret Uses of Uranus and Wonderful Bomb. Wonderful Bomb was another one.
Yeah.
But after
I still how World War III started without even trying. That is hilarious.
Well, there's just so many iconic images, Slim Pickens riding, yee-haw, the atomic bomb at the end. So after deciding to make the film a dark comedy, Kubrick actually brought in screenwriter Terry Southern in late 1962. Now, his choice was influenced by reading, there was this comic novel called The Magic Christian, which Kubrick had received as a gift from Peter Sellers, and which itself became a Sellers film a few years later. It's just very interesting. Now, Peter Sellers plays 3 different parts. I don't know if you know this, but he actually played multiple roles, kind of similar roles in The Mouse That Roared, which was 5 years earlier. I haven't seen that one. I think I saw a preview once, and you can kind of see where some of those characters he carried over to those 3 in Doctor Strangelove. But Sellers ended up playing 3 of the 4 roles that were written for him. He had been expected to play the King Kong role, the guy who was the aircraft commander.
Yep.
Slim Pickens would play that, but that's why they wanted someone with like a Texan English accent,
Yep.
That's a hard accent to do. I think Peter Sellers could have pulled that one off too. But either way, I mean, still he had 3 iconic roles, 3 completely different roles, playing the president, and ended up playing the group captain Lionel Mandrake. He also played the president. I love the president's name, Merkin Muffley. And just the names. And then he played the iconic title role, Dr. Strangelove. And George C. Scott was another hoot in this movie. I think Kubrick wanted him to play him more childish, and just some of the facial expressions that George C. Scott makes throughout the movie. And it's unlike any other George C. Scott role ever.
Yeah.
I mean, people always rave about Peter Sellers, which, again, the guy should have won an Oscar for playing those 3 different roles, but George C. Scott was incredible. Sliding across the floor. They're trying to clobber us, It's just, the movie's just so iconic. I mean, I can't really add anything to the movie that everyone else has added already, but it's just such a masterpiece. It really is a masterpiece. It's one of the greatest films ever made. Very first movie with James Earl Jones, too. It was his film debut 60 years ago. 93 years old, I think, James Earl Jones is now.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, it's an absolute perfect film from start to finish. I mean, Kubrick made arguably the most perfect films. I mean, again, 12 films in his whole filmography, and you could argue every one of those movies are the greatest ever made. So I know most people would agree, except for Adam. So
I'm not saying it. It's not. It's definitely considered one of the greatest movies.
It just didn't jive with you 100%.
Just again, okay, cool. It's like me and the Rolling Stones. I get it. I respect it. Don't really care.
I mean, Charlie Watts is a better drummer than Ringo, easily. But
I would listen to Ringo any day over Charlie Watts. I personally, So again, when people tell me it's the greatest of all time, and anything for that matter.
Yeah, I have a hard time. I have a hard time saying the greatest of all time because there's so many movies, films that I consider perfect and among the greatest. I would put Dr. Strangelove, Marnie, Qui-Gon as amongst the greatest films ever made.
Yeah, and I respect it, and I totally understand it. It's just one of those movies that I watched, and it was just like
Kubrick does have that effect on people. He really does, because there's no. It's okay for a Stanley Kubrick. I've never heard anyone say it was all right when it comes to a Stanley Kubrick movie. It's either it's awesome, it's amazing, one of the greatest films ever seen, or it's I really didn't like that movie. When it comes to Kubrick, those are the answers. Those are the two answers I get.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't even say I didn't dislike it. It's not something I'm going to revisit, though. It's be like, all right, I get it. Okay, cool. I can see why people think it's one of the greatest of all time. I understand. It's just all right. That was why I was getting it with my reference to the Rolling Stones. I understand their impact. I understand their influence. I understand how great they are. But to me, again, I'll pick the Beatles every day over the Stones, just out of personal taste. And that's just the way I took Dr. Strangelove.
You just painted this black, Adam.
Well, I
get it?
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
No, that's the thing. Yeah. Kubrick, you either love his movies or you don't, and art is subjective, but Adam is wrong. I'm just kidding. No, Dr. Strangelove, though, even if you have a lukewarm response, you got to see it at least once. It's just one of those films. Unfortunately, I have a good friend of mine who also, if a film is overhyped, he won't enjoy it as much. So I have to be careful.
That's probably my problem. Is I heard all about it. I heard about it, and I was like, okay, it's. I get that way with a lot of it. It's why I don't really watch the NFL anymore. I used to love watching football with my dad growing up, but over the last 20 years, it's the fandom has become so friggin' outrageous that I can't stand even watching a game anymore.
If I need to fall asleep, you put on a football game, I'll fall asleep.
But you know what I'm saying? The overhype, overcraze, usually
I never got
turns
into
me off.
See, if someone say, "Hey Chris, are you up for football?" I'm like, I'll try playing it. I can't watch it. I can't. If I watch any sporting event, I'll fall asleep. It's just boring to me.
Right. Well, I mean, I was just using that as an example of.
I'm just chiming in on my own opinions.
Yeah. Again, I will never not acknowledge it as one of the greatest movies of all time. Personally, I was just like, okay, cool.
Dr. Strangelove is one of the top films of all time, and of course, most of these films we've been talking about are amongst the creme of films.
Sure.
Fistful of Dollars, even though I don't consider it a 5-star film, it's definitely a major film. And, Hard Day's Night is such an impactful film, as well as Goldfinger and a lot of these cult horror films.
Mask of the Red Death.
Yeah, that's definitely... When people talk about horror films
and cult movies,
it's always mentioned.
Yeah, the Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movies are some of the best cult horror movies you'll ever find, especially the ones featuring Vincent Price. I
Right.
mean, this is where Vincent Price becomes Vincent Price as we know him today.
So we hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the year 1964. Obviously, we could have talked about all sorts of movies, and we're going to probably feature one or two of them separately. There's a lot of films to check out in 1964, and thanks to Tubi, and thanks to all of these amazing boutique labels. I mean, you can get a Criterion copy of Dr. Strangelove. There's a 4K if you go right through Columbia Pictures. I mean, there's Criterion has all the Jacques Demy movies of from Umbrella. You can actually buy Umbrellas of Cherbourg separately from the box set. Of course, Fistful of Dollars is available on 4K through Kino, and I mean, thank God we live in a time where all these movies are so easily accessible. And I know Kino and Warner Archives has released a lot of the Roger Corman stuff, and of course James Bond's always available.
Yeah,
no matter where you turn. Same with Alfred Hitchcock. Universal, they've done amazing 4K restorations of all of the Universal released Hitchcock films. Have at it. Qui-Gon, again, Criterion, and I think Eureka Masters of Cinema series overseas. If you want to import that disc, I don't know if it's the 183-minute version though, but again, there's options to see Qui-Gon as well. However you get to see these movies, see them. They're definitely worth watching once. Again, comment, let us know what you think about all these movies from 1964. If you agree that Adam is wrong, you can tell us that too, or if you think I'm wrong, either way, let us know. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Thank you so much. Scared for Reels. We'll see you soon.